and welcome to Journeys and Journals. And we're going back to covered wagon days. You know, when you start in with family history and you learn, you go, oh, I wonder what it was like. Well, someone had the good sense to take a picture.
That was in 1860.
1860, they were taking pictures?
1866. It was kind of like a tin type, you know, it was
And they put a little arrow up to the tallest guy on top of the tallest.
That was my great-grandfather.
That's your great-grandfather. Where was it?
He came from England, and he left St. Joseph, Missouri, and he wasn't married, so he hired on as a driver on one of the wagons.
Wagon train?
Yeah.
Coming west?
Yeah, and they came west.
Oh my goodness.
And some of those people stopped in Utah, but he ended up later going to California, and that's why my mother was from California.
Well, now, you have a book here of stories.
This is him. But see, that was a tin type. It was tin, really tin.
And next to it is this genealogy pedigree chart. And next to that is a story that you've written. Now, how does it happen? Everything is so organized. Are you a teacher?
Well, most people don't think it's organized the way they do it now on computers, but I like to have it in a book as well as on computers.
And it is. It's a wonderful way to envision.
When I first put the pictures in with it, then I would sat down with each one of my married children and went through it, so they would know what each one of the great grandparents and aunts and uncles looked like.
Oh, you know, this is just a great archive. I wished someone in my past would have done all these lovely tin types.
See, this is the original of that big one.
And then it's blown up to a size that we can see those people. Now, this is the family we're talking about, right? 2 generations later?
That's our family. Our 5 children when they were adults.
And so this is Dad's grandfather that we just looked at coming west on...
No, that's mine.
Okay.
Yeah. But, Okay,
so that's...
Yeah.
We're generations of history.
Yeah, it's
This is much about Dad, right?
Yeah, that one's about Dad.
Your
dad.
My
dad. His name was Waldo Milkey. He said nobody else had a name the same as his ever. And he was born in Minnesota in 1903 in a log cabin. And one thing that I thought was a funny story, he said his father worked for the railroad, and they lived in a section house most of the time along the railroad. But when his father got the first car, before there was any cars there, they all used the railroad or trails, wagons. And they got the first car, and they came home with it when my dad was like about 8 or something like that. And everybody in all the hills and all the farms came to the trail, the road, to see what that noise was that was coming. He said we felt like we were in a parade.
Oh, I bet that's true, because, you know, they thought that if you traveled that fast, surely you'd fall apart or...
Well, the fastest they'd ever gone, except of the wagon, was when they would go on the hand cars, you know, the ones you pumped, one guy on each side. And they did that on the railroad tracks for the Great Northern Railroad and all of the railroads. And if they, like one time my dad had an axe over his shoulder and he fell and it cut him when he was a kid. And they got on the hand car and went into the doctor. That's the only thing they could do.
Well, I do know a funny story out of Glendale. There was a little town, and the only way you could get to it was by the train tracks. But if the train wasn't running that day or that week or whatever, you had to take the hand car. But women weren't allowed on those.
I bet not.
Only men. So I was just told that story, and I'll have to check on the name of the town, but it was very close to where the trail went down to the Rogue River. Now, your story comes to Oregon in 19 and what?
My dad went, the whole family, the whole clan. They were intermarried, brothers and sisters and everything from 2 big families, and they all got tired of the snow in Minnesota, so they sent the youngest one to go find somewhere where it was warmer. And he went everywhere in the western part of the United States, and he decided on California. California then was like a paradise. before it got so busy. And they bought land where it's downtown now, and it was just empty lots, you could see. Anyway, that was in 1921. My dad was in college, and he quit because he didn't want the whole family leaving him behind. And they all went on the train and their furniture and everything, free passage, because they all worked for the railroad, to Southern California. And they all built houses right close there. And my dad worked for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer for a long time.
Movies.
Yeah, and he did the cabinets in Betty Davis's trailer. She said he'd had to do them 3 times. She was so picky. He got so mad at her, and he did that for a long time and he played the piano and he played it in dance bands at night, and he was a real going person, and he did all kinds of things. And then he got tired of them ordering him to go out in the ocean so they could film, and he was a carpenter building stuff. And finally, when a man that was going to retire, that was a building contractor, said, "You know what, you're an up-and-coming young man. I want to turn my business over to you when I retire." And my dad said, "But I don't know anything about carpentry." And he said, "You go to school at night school." And my dad went to night school for 4 years to learn drawing and plans and how to figure jobs and whatever, and he turned the business over to him. And he did it from then on until he came to Oregon to build Camp White in 1941. And he said, "This is a good place to raise kids," and he just stayed here.
Well, that's what brought.
But then later he went back to California in 59 or 60. They moved back to California. He couldn't get financing here, and that's when he did that picture.
Well, now you have pictures. He built wigwam burners.
Yes, when he got through building Camp White, he needed a job, and he had given up his contracting business, so he had to find business. And so he got a crew together, and they built wigwam burners all up in all the little towns up and down. He built one in Glendale, he built one everywhere. And then he built section houses along the railroad. He built one in Glendale, he built one in Oakland, he built them all up and down.
What's a section house?
Section house is the house where the family lives that takes care, that's the manager of that part of the railroad, that section of tracks.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Make sure that the mail gets on the mail car and the water is ready for the water car, or whatever. And
kids, they used to have water on train cars, but there was a special reason.
Yeah.
The trains were propelled
they
by
were steam. Yeah. Oh, my dad, when he was little, he said when the First World War started, well, one of the guys that worked for my dad, that was a fireman and started the train with a big wheel, he had to go to the war. And so my dad wanted to do it. And he was just like 13 or something like that, and 14. And he asked his dad, "Can I take his job?" Because he'd gone through 8th grade and they had no more schools there. And he said, "You're too small. You're just too small." My dad begged him and begged him. Finally, he said, "Okay." So my dad worked for him, and he was the one that put the wood in the firebox and got the wheel turning to start the train and everything. He said that wheel was so tall he could barely reach the top of it, and he said he would be crying, but he wouldn't let his dad see him cry. Because he didn't want him to say, "Yeah, I told you, you were too small to do this."
You were too little.
Yeah.
You were too
But anyway, that's what he did here in Oregon for a long time, and then he started doing construction again until 59 or 60, and then they went back to California, and he built housing developments and mausoleums and all
What
kinds
about
of things.
this mausoleums?
A mausoleum is where they put the caskets, the crypts, into holes like this, and they're big, huge buildings. They're usually like 8 high, and then they put marble all on the outside of the building and build an office with marble and whatever. It's very fancy. And in California, they build a lot of them. Through the middle part of California, they build a lot of them, like Salinas and Hollister. He built those. They put them on top of hills. And my dad had his crew doing those when he was down there. And then where's that picture about the...
Oh, my goodness. We're in California now.
This was a picture. I don't know if it shows that.
Weed, California.
Yeah. My dad was contracted to put in new sidewalks and curbs, and I don't know what year that was. Oh, it says 68. He was putting sidewalks and curbs in Weed, California. And that was, I think that was about the time the freeway went through and they kind of bypassed town. And so he did it. And there's the main street in Weed that used to be the old 99, and then there's streets that go downhill from there, and that's where most of the stores are. And he did all those streets, and they had this big article on the front of the Reading paper.
With this picture?
Yeah, with that picture of my dad, because when he was doing them, they had to excavate and tear that all out, and they found all kinds of relics, 100-year-old relics, and they found tons and tons of beer bottles and
bootleggers.
Yeah,
Past.
that they had, that were down in these holes where they had buried them, and then the boardwalk was over the top of them, and so now they put them all in and they dug all that out.
You know, your books are just fantastic, and this was your idea. Who's this guy?
That's my dad. When after he retired, he didn't give up his contractor's license till he was 84.
We've got a cameraman today, and I asked, and he's just gotten his driver's license a year or so ago, and it will retire 9 years. I mean, it will expire 9 years from now when he turns 100. So hats off to you, Bill.
Oh, I need to tell one story about my dad that will tell an example of him. He died at 93, and we didn't have a funeral. We had a celebration of his life because he was such a character. And the person giving the eulogy said, I've got to tell this story. He met him at Camp White in 41, but he'd known him the rest of his life. He said, one time, our whole family was out for a drive, and my dad still had on his clothes from church. And he said, well, these friends of ours are up at Lake of the Woods, and so let's go up there and talk to them. And so my mom said, all right. So we went up to Lake of the Woods, and they were out water skiing. And the guy came back to the dock and said, have you ever done this? And my dad said, no, but I skied when I was a kid. And he said, well, maybe you could water ski. And he said, of course I can water ski. He could do anything, according to him. And so here he has white shirt, suit, tie, the whole thing on. He rolled his pants legs up a little bit, and the guy brought the boat over, and my dad stepped off the dock onto the skis. He skied him all over that lake and back, and he stepped on the dock. He never got wet.
I can't believe it. This was Lake of the Woods.
Yeah, that's the kind of person my dad was. That's a good example of it.
Well, now I understand a little where your tenacity comes
Yeah,
from.
I think you're right.
Your husband has stories, and I just love to learn more about him. If we could get him on set to talk. But what is this newspaper route? That was so interesting.
You want to come?
You can tell his story for him, huh?
A few years ago, I think it was in 96 or 97, well, my husband was looking for a different job. He usually surveyed and was a contractor, different things, but he was in between jobs. And so he took on this Mail Tribune route down into Northern California. And you have to leave at midnight, because that's when the papers come out. And you go, they had so many people just quit on him to go down there. He drove 260 some miles a night.
Every night?
Every night, 7 days a week.
To where? He'd leave
He would
Medford?
go to Montague, he'd go to Wairika, and then he'd go to Montague, and then he'd go up in the mountains, the back way to Klamath Falls, actually, and you go clear up to Iron Gate Lake, and there's a dam up there, and there's a road that says not fit for driving, but he went anyway, around the backside of the lake, and that was the shortest way, so he'd usually take that, but it was very, very rough road. And then on the other side of the lake, there was some people who were retired that were up there in a little community. Other than that, beyond them, to go the rest of the way around that lake, it was absolutely wilderness. And he had so many things happen. We saw every kind of animal. I was working at the school district then. I was the baker for the Medford School District for 10 years, and when there was a time off from school or in the summer, I would go with him because it's much easier for somebody else to put the papers in and you can keep your seatbelt on, because one time he didn't have his seatbelt on and he went off the cliff. And so that isn't good.
The newspapers were late that day.
Anyway, and so we would do that. And you could see every kind of an animal. You could see bobcats. There's a lady up there that fed the deer, and she got arrested a whole bunch of times for doing it because she would get more and more deer. She was feeding about 50 of them. And that makes them too tame, they don't like that. Anyway, and there was ranches up there. There's people up there hiding from the law. There's people up there that went up there to retire.
Sure.
In all those bare hills, there was a herd of wild horses up there. You had to be careful driving at night that they weren't in the road. There was by the Klamath River, there was a big, what do you call it, Marwan? Anyway, where the cold air came out from, it was underground, air vents. All kinds of really interesting things up there. One time he went to a house to see if they still wanted to continue the paper, and they pulled their gun on him and told him to get off the property. He had all kinds of things happen. And then that one time he went off the cliff, they pulled his truck out of there with a tow truck, I guess.
Oh.
Yeah.
I could almost see
And then they called, the lady from the Mail Tribune office called and said, your husband drove his truck off a cliff trying to miss a deer. Do you know where the papers are?
Uh-oh.
And I said, I don't know where the paper, I don't care where the papers are. I want to know where my husband is. He's all right. Yeah, he's all right, which he wasn't. But I said, if he didn't deliver the papers, they're probably still in the truck.
That's kind of a given. Now, you have done something here that I think our people are going to love to learn about. This could be done at a family gathering. It could be done at a church gathering. It could be done at your Ladies' Aid Society. What's it all about? You've made this.
Yes, I just took paper and put a cover on it because I've been asked to do journal classes before. And so what I did was I put this in the front. Do you want me to read this?
Please.
It says, it's a quotation from an 1862 paper. And it says, if a man keeps no diary, the path crumbles away behind him as his feet leave it, and days gone by are but little more than a blank, broken by a few distorted shadows. His life is all confined within the limits of today. There must be a richness about the life of a person who keeps a journal, and a million more little links and ties must bind him to the members of his family circle and to all those among whom he lives. And what I would do is take this, and then in the first page I would write, today I and the date, and tell each person in the class, finish that sentence. And when they did, I'd say, now you started a journal.
Okay, I'm going to ask you. Today
I came on Better Life Television. I'm going to write that in my journal, you can bet.
Today I came on Better Life Television, and today I got to talk your story of your family coming to Oregon because of Camp White. Let's zero in a little on what you know about Camp White.
Well, Camp White, my dad was a section foreman.
When you say section foreman, does that mean like kind
they
of boss?
divided it up in crews, and he was a crew person. They would say, now you're building this section, this many barracks, or the theater, or whatever, and then here's your crew of men. And so they would do it. And they had a bunch of different people doing that. Anyway, and then when he finished that, he did the prisoner of war camp.
At Camp White? Tell me.
And the night before they put the first German prisoners in it, well, he took our family out there and we went through it.
You? Okay.
And my brother was, a grade school age child. He locked him in a cell. They had cells that had bars, but they had window with this bars, and a bed in it for the ones that got out of hand. But I don't know if they ever used them. They were very well disciplined. But anyway, so we went and saw that. He also was the foreman over the shooting range, where they target practice and whatever, which is now the Jackson County Sports Park.
Oh, okay.
They made it into that. And my husband happened to be working for Jackson County Parks at the time they did that, so he got to help survey that. But anyway, my dad had my grandfather move up here, and he was working out there also, and they spoke nothing but German at home, especially when they didn't want us to know what they were saying.
Of course.
So when I went to college, first thing I did was take German. But anyway, when we would go out there to pick up my dad, if my mom needed the car, the German prisoners would be walking in blocks, I don't know, maybe 50 or 150 men, whatever, and walking them out on the desert, and they'd pick up rocks or whatever all day. There's a lot of rocks out there. And then they would walk them back, and they sang German songs the whole way. And us kids loved listening to that. And my grandfather, when he would come to get in the car sometimes, he'd walk over to the fence and talk to them in German. And they said they loved it in Medford, in that area, because it looked a lot like Germany. And they told him that some of them were 12 and 13-year-olds, 14 years old, and they'd already been in the German army long enough to be captured. But I think they had to go into the youth corps in Germany at 12. But he said some of them were 13 and 14 years old.
And some of those prisoners of war didn't mind Tibet being captured and coming to
I
Oregon?
don't know, because they would stand there and talk to him. Nobody was rebellious, that I saw. I didn't see any incidences of that.
Well, I understand some people decided to bring their family here.
Yes, there's quite a few. If you go out to the military museum at Camp White, at White City, you'll see things about people who have brought their family, come here to raise their families.
And it's a fine museum, and I encourage all of you to go there. Even the steps to get to the second floor is a wonder.
They have a ramp.
You take a ramp that is from over there to over here.
It's big.
2-story, the equivalent, a huge ramp, and all I could think of, oh, wouldn't it be fun to run down this? Then that's where the museum is, and it has military uniforms, it has things that came back. You have some material out there in the museum?
When they're excavating to make the sports park, and my husband worked out there, they dug out a bazooka shell that looked like it was almost brand new. I don't know how it had been in the dirt there for all those years, because this was like 10, 15, 20 years ago that they dug it out. And they sent somebody from the ammunition, whatever, from the county to see that it was a dead one, and it was. And so they said, whoever wants it can have it. So my husband brought it home. And now I took it to the museum.
And what did you tell them at the museum?
I told them, if you're going to put this back in the closet and just leave it there, I'm not going to leave it, because I would rather somebody could see it. I'll take it somewhere else. And they said, no, and it's in the case.
And you could have brought it here to Better Life TV.
Yeah.
We did have...
it's about that long.
It is. We had one of the balloons that carried incendiaries, and Deb Potts brought that because he'd found it while logging up in a tree. They sent, this was Japanese, sent these balloons over to set our forests on fire. They didn't know we got rain here.
Yeah.
And so those little incendiary devices.
Well, when they went out to pick up the rocks, they would put them all along the barracks. They made paths and flower gardens and everything with those white rocks, and they always painted them white. I remember when I was a kid. That was so neat.
Oh, and so the rocks that they gathered went to some good use.
Yeah, the Germans gathered the rocks, and the soldiers used them to decorate their yard.
Well, that whole area was not always Camp White.
No.
It used to be agate.
Oh yeah, and it had ranches on it too, because my parents had several friends who the government had bought them out the ranch to make it, the camp.
Agate desert.
Yeah.
And it was so hot. The same guy, Bill Young, said that those people that came from up north, here where they were in the middle of summer in their woolen leggings and in the jigger grass out there, and these kids from Northern Oregon weren't used to it, and he said they'd just keel over when they were marching, keel over like tin pins, he'd
say. When our soldiers especially marched, they were really, really hot like that.
Oh, you'd have to be in great physical shape. I guess you always are in the military.
Yep.
But right here, this was where you had a picture of Roxanne.
Oh, that
Well,
one.
you know about her.
Oh, Roxanne, I read that. We go to the history places around. They named Roxanne after Roxy, I can't remember what her last name was, Bennett, I think. And she was a sister to Britt's wife, I think it was. Anyway, they came and they first settled. When they first came here, they settled at the base of Roxanne. And then they moved and went to Jacksonville, and her husband stayed there. And her name was Roxanne, and that's who it was named after.
Well, it's a lovely part of the world. And if you folks haven't been out wandering around me, I encourage you to go on a history tour. See some of these places. That's, come from... We're expanding up to the Eugene area and into California. We hope that you will take advantage of the beautiful nature. Crater Lake isn't that far from any of us. So, you've been to Crater Lake?
Oh yeah, we go every year.
Just for fun?
Yeah, we always go on Labor Day. My husband worked up there one winter, stayed there all winter.
Oh.
That was very interesting. Yeah, the snow was he was on the second or third floor of the hotel, of the Yeah, and the snow was up to the windowsill.
Well, you see if you can't talk him into talking on Better Life TV, but we sure have welcomed you into our studio. And thank you for coming with all those fantastic stories about the way it was.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Your mother's a beautiful woman, and you think she made all those ruffles by hand.
Yep, she did. She was very good at that.
And this woman has made all these albums and family history.
Oh, where's the big one? Where's the big picture?
Big picture of your family.
Yeah, the grandkids, that big, huge one.
There is a picture that you have put together. Now, where did you get the bright idea to do that?
I just got tired of school pictures all around, and so I cut them all out and put them in one picture.
And every one of these kids, you have how many grandkids?
30.
30 grandkids.
And 5 great.
Well, this is fantastic. Yeah, I'm real glad to show that picture of all the grandkids, because you can get it in one big frame that way, can't you?
I don't know what we did with it. It's over there somewhere.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your stories and to inspire us to put our family history in a book. Some of these you've got bound, and some of them just punched, and some of them in 3-ring binders. How'd you get started doing this?
I just like history.
I just
and I like family.
You've heard it here on Better Life TV. I like history too, and I guess you do too, or you wouldn't have tuned in today. Thank you so much for being my guest. Thank you for calling and volunteering. You like quilts too, I see, and we are.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and it's been a pleasure to be invited into your living room.